A while back, I wrote The 40-Year Programmer. You can think of it as my declaration of programming as art, not business. It's about taking your time and getting good gradually over many years, which works great for art, and often badly for your career. Today, I want to talk about the differences between programming as art and programming as business. Over and over, I say programming is great work, and it's an okay job. Here's the thing. Programming is art. It's a kind of art where the final product is a behavior, not a visible or material object, so in some ways it's massively different from writing, but in others it's exactly the same. That doesn't mean it's all good art, obviously, but a programmer is modeling the world and expressing something. Programming is one specific artistic medium. Art usually sucks when you do it for business's sake. We remember a lot of art done for its own sake, Renaissance paintings. We remember a certain amount of exceptional commercial art, like the song Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, based on an advertisement. But mostly, commercial art is bland and forgettable. You'll also see art where we try to avoid that. Movies, music albums, book covers drawn by famous illustrators, and so on, center the artists and their visions. And sometimes something decent comes through, sometimes not. But a random commercial's cinematography is usually nothing to write home about, or its music. A brochure design is rarely done with intention, skill, and initiative. Mostly they're trying to be pretty and forgettable. Bland. Programming is mostly done for money, and it's mostly bland and forgettable. You'll see exceptions where Code for Money is still good and still has a real opinion or two, just like advertising jingles and brochure designs. That's just not the way to bet, like with advertising jingles and brochure designs. The design is also often bland, but that's not what I mean. The behavior, the programming, is generally bland as well. We use the libraries other people use. We do boring programming, not just where we're not doing anything new, but where it would be useful to do something new. If you're not hiring artists, and you don't want to, doing something new is bad. If you have a tool that pretty much gets the job done, you use it, and you pretty much get the job done. Is that a criticism? It depends. But it's the exact opposite of programming for its own sake. It's also the exact opposite of seeing what could be done. There's very little money in playing piano. Almost any other way of making money is easier. That's partly for lack of demand. It's hard to charge a ton of money for music. It's also because the supply of good musicians is so strong. You can get absolutely world-class piano instruction for very cheap, sometimes even for free. With the rise of YouTube, we are seeing an unprecedented number of amazing young piano prodigies, which should tell you that the instruction is quite good. Programming pays a lot because doing it is unpleasant for most people. It also pays a lot because you can charge a lot for software, and it pays a lot because the instruction is terrible. It's genuinely hard to learn, and the available instruction is bad. It's not all our fault. There have only been programmers since the 1950s or so, and most of us make terrible teachers. The rare exceptions, Seymour Papert, say, are legendary, but still rare. As a result, all our tools and environments are gratuitously awful. They're designed by non-teachers, and they're mostly hard to teach and learn. The rare chances to see counterexamples. I think of Sandi Metz's 99 Bottles. I think of The Ladder of Abstraction. Um, Remind us how bad the day-to-day is. There's joy in programming once you know what you're doing. At least there is for me and some others like me. But it's not a field that's going to meet you halfway. Maybe someday the tools and teaching will be so good that learning programming is merely intimidating, like how composing music is intimidating. Instead, right now it's intimidating like how composing music used to be intimidating, where it was considered a weakness to need a piano instead of hearing all the notes in your head. Maybe programming is just too hard to teach than anything else? No. There were some good teachers back when people like Seymour Papert were teaching things like Logo. You didn't really even need a computer to do Logo. Logo works fine with a few kids and some paper. Um, Scratch exists now, works now, isn't nearly as hard to start teaching it, and it uses Smalltalk under the hood. It is a real language and a good way to learn programming. But instead, we mostly learn via things that are painful, hard to learn, and hard to teach, because they are the shortest distance to getting a job in programming. Maybe that's fine. It definitely is if you assume programming isn't a worthy art, and getting a paycheck is the only acceptable purpose for it. You could argue against my musicians analogy. You know, music's a big industry, but how much of that goes to musicians? If you treat really successful musicians like Taylor Swift or Beyonce as having two jobs, being a musician and running a media empire, then one of those two jobs pays thousands of times more than the other. Being a musician can be very profitable in the rare cases where it enables a slight extra advantage to something that's already very profitable, like running a media empire. Um, Mostly being a musician pays lower than survival wages. That's pretty typical for work that feels meaningful in and of itself, especially if it doesn't also make somebody else a ton of money. You'll sometimes hear people talk about win-win scenarios and how software raises all boats, and some of that is true. For instance, sharing your knowledge by teaching or by writing open source software does make everybody better at software faster. For programming as art, it's a great idea. But programming as a job is uglier that way. You have a fairly fixed number of jobs being handed out. Making everybody better makes the competition fiercer. It's pretty close to zero sum, where helping one person hurts everybody else about as much. Certain folks, especially consultants, would argue that this is all positive sum, and more confident and capable job seekers increases the size of the industry, and everything just gets better faster. Maybe, but businesses act as though it's not true, limiting the benefit to random people. A business won't say, oh, the last 3 people we hired were great, let's hire a bunch more people. Though that's not how that goes. The benefit, if any, seems much smaller than for programming as art. I feel proud of teaching programming, especially when I think I've done a good job. I wrote a book I think is really good called Rebuilding Rails. I feel a lot more mixed about offering career advice. That is a straight up competition between you and all the other hopefuls trying to get the same job. I don't mind helping you, but I feel mixed about hurting everybody else. Programming instruction has another strike against it. The students are mostly there to get a job. You've seen the constant complaint that universities don't teach the skills that industry currently wants. This is true, they don't. Uh, if you wanted to learn programming as art, you'd want to know the timeless skills. I promise they exist, even in programming. But timeless skills in programming are like timeless skills in any other art medium. That's not what gets you the job. You might have a fantastic sense of composition honed by composing Swiss-style minimalist posters of text. But the company would like somebody who can airbrush a shiny smooth picture of an anime girl with gigantic eyes. Programming has a lot of similar situations. Yes, the lambda calculus can teach you a deeper understanding of modularity, but that's not what we build web apps in. Sure, C can teach you some interesting architectural stuff about how computers work, but we're building a free iOS app to scam parents with in-app purchases. If I were advising a young programmer who genuinely loved programming as expression and art, I could tell her about the work, I could tell her about the job, but it would be hard to forge a middle path between those two. It's getting harder, year by year. Silicon Valley companies used to be about making something impossible possible. Spreadsheets. Do a thing you couldn't do before spreadsheets. They made vast quantities of repetitive math workable. If you put together a professional workstation to use a computer for a job, every program has a predecessor that first made a thing possible, back in the dawn days. Art Workstation, you need various drawing and illustrating programs. You could argue about what was the first one, but if you think of Photoshop as the grandpa, you're not far off. Um, there were a lot of companies that made programs to do things which at first computers and people couldn't do, and then afterward computers could do those things. Music Workstation needs a DAW, also a variety of audio converters, filters, and so on. Now software companies fine-tune those things. Once software companies made new things that didn't exist yet. Computer lathe needs CAD programs to design the shape it's cutting out. Those too had origin stories. There are similar enabling programs for hardware design and accounting and medical data entry and many, many other jobs. Didn't exist, then did exist. And once upon a time, Silicon Valley was about creating new programs to make new things possible. At least up through Google, you could argue that that was true. These days, a Silicon Valley company is making a smoother, easier to use version of something that already exists and finding a better way to market it. The days of make something new possible are mostly over and have been for years. Every so often it happens, but mostly companies say they're doing that, and they're transparently lying. Here's why you care. As an artist, a business who's creating something new needs you more. A business that's tweaking how they sell an old thing needs you less. Programmers used to thread the needle between good art and good business because software businesses needed really good software artists. They don't anymore. You can tell in a lot of ways. Open plan offices, which are much worse for doing work, have been standard for a long time because they're lower rent. Remote work tools are better than ever, but here we are returning to the office. The best programmers can do things that most programmers can't, even if you hire 10 times as many. But it's seriously rare to see even a great programmer paid 3 times what a beginner gets. Corporations thrive by making people cheap and easily replaceable. That's not just true in software, it's true everywhere, and they've been working at it for centuries. They're genuinely good at it at this point. Uh, Businesses don't require amazing software engineers because it's more profitable and stable to build a business that doesn't need amazing people, so you don't have to find or retain them. Getting the very best programmers used to be a matter of tech startup survival. It's just not anymore. And that means if you want to be a really good software artist, the business doesn't much care anymore. The old way doesn't help you much. Not these days. Can you just do programming as art? Sure, you'll be out of step, but artists often are. If you write about how to do that, people won't understand. Like when I said, oh, you can keep programming decade after decade, folks reply with, no, you can't, because companies won't hire you. If you're doing it as art, you actually don't care if companies hire you. You have to figure out what you're doing for money, of course, but nobody will tell you you can't play piano because you have to eat. It's just understood that you'll have a day job, and that's the easy way to do it. Uh, I used to hear a lot of recommendations that you do programming as your day job and do hobby stuff on your own. You'll still hear that. It's fine. Just keep in mind that programming for business tends to dominate all dialogue about programming everywhere. If you program for love, business people will show up and tell you that you have to do it for them. Everything needs to be enterprise friendly. Everything has to be sufficiently security conscious that banks can use it. You can be out of step with that, but you can figure out a lot about how tolerated programming as art is by watching how other programmers respond to you doing that. Keep in mind that you're on a weird path and people won't even understand what you're talking about, which again is very traditional for artists, but keep it in mind. One popular rebuttal to all of this goes, yeah, but programming isn't art. I used to be annoyed by that response. I'm more entertained these days since I know a little more history. Novels, comics, games have all faced the exact same criticism, which was nonsensical for all of them, too. Computer programs are routinely used to make art. The behavior of the program can light up LEDs or otherwise make visible or audible patterns or words. That combination is clearly, without question, art. Yeah, but the code isn't art. You just hooked it up to something that made art. Like, no. That's like saying digital art isn't art because the monitor phosphors make it art. Not even a little. The interesting and intentional pattern made by a human is the art. Frequently, that pattern lives in data and signal, like with recorded music, not necessarily, in the physical object. Ebooks are writing, and thus art. Digital painting is painting, and thus art. The behavior of the computer program is art. It can still be awful art, of course. The cat sat on the mat. It is a poem. It's just not a very good one. Back in the Silicon Valley days, there was a lot of talk about changing the world through companies and through programming. That line is getting less common as people realize what corporate programming is actually doing to the world. Cryptocurrency, artificial intelligence, addictive Skinner-box design, climate change, and so on look really bad, and they keep looking worse. The tech industry seems as hell-bent on world destruction as most other industries. As with fossil fuels and tobacco, I don't think we'll be remembered fondly. But you can still change the world by art, and by love, same as always. And sometimes programming can help. The thing is, getting really good at something isn't necessarily profitable. Changing the world for the better isn't usually profitable. Companies do not, historically, pay you to do those things. Programming as art is almost certainly headed the same way as playing piano, a thing that's intrinsically rewarding, but not terribly profitable. Don't worry, the miserable kind of programming mediocre stuff will still pay well for quite a while yet. It used to be that we didn't have to worry if we were teaching programming as art or not. You could learn the same way as for business and make money doing it. It looks like those days are slowly coming to an end. The kind of satisfying, skilled, difficult programming that you do for your own improvement and enjoyment is less and less what businesses need, want, or tolerate. So how do you get really good? If you want to for your own sake. I have more to say on that topic. I've said a lot already. There's a specific kind of practice which helps a lot. But step one is simpler. Understand that you are no longer in alignment with what the business wants. If you're a fantastic, hard-to-replace programmer, then you're hard to replace. That's bad from the business's point of view. It's also the entire reason for art. If every artist was interchangeable, why would we care what they had to say?